Its history goes back to 300 BC. It's the largest city in the Aquitaine, and even though Parisians don't like me saying it, this is where Parisian architecture came from. Bienvenue à Bordeaux. Remember when you were a child and all you asked was why? Well, I never quite outgrew that whole quest for knowledge phase. In fact, I've made a career out of asking who, what, where, why, and how as an arts and travel journalist for the past 20 years. So, if I have an insatiable curiosity about the exciting, inspiring, beautiful world of art, architecture, and hidden history all around us, I bet you do too. This isn't your typical what to do on a vacation travel show. Oh no, this is your all-access pass to a deeper understanding of the world's great art and architecture, people and places, history, and how did they do that. So, come along on our educational journey, our field trip for grown-ups who have never quite grown up, and learn on Curious Traveler. Curious Traveler is made possible by the following.
Europe is a treasure trove of fascinating history, rich culture, and renowned cities. Ama Waterways River Cruises offers a way to see all this wonder in person. You can discover more at amawaterways.com.
Towering fjords, Nordic culture, Scandinavian heritage, the Northern Lights. So many ways to experience Scandinavia. Adventures begin at firebirdtours.com. Blue Ribbon Bags, baggage protection made simple. We track and return your delayed baggage around the world. We send automatic email updates so you can do what you love. BlueRibbonBags.com. Anatomy, European travel clothing for women. Anatomy is designed to fly. Anatomy.com.
From an ancient village known as Bordeaux along the Garonne River, ruled for centuries by the Celts, the Romans, the English, and then finally the French. Known around the world for its fine wines and its joie de vivre, Bordeaux has so much to be curious about. Ah, Belle Bordeaux, known by many names from Bordeaux and Little Rome during ancient times. Then the Pearl of the Aquitaine when it became part of the Aquitaine region of France, to Sleeping Beauty when its walls were black with pollution. But today it's sparkling clean and has always been on the Port de la Lune, or Port of the Moon. And somewhere in all that history, Bordeaux gets captured by King Clovis of the Franks, which is where we get the name France, and then the French nickname Au bord de l'eau, meaning along the waters, which, when you say it real fast, sounds a whole lot like Bordeaux.
Ooh.
No matter which name you use, here's what I'm curious about in Bordeaux. Why is this teenage girl so important to Bordeaux's history? What's so gross about this clock? Why is this square so bare, but this square so overdressed? Why is this the symbol of Bordeaux? Why is this lady holding a duck? And of course, why is Bordeaux so known for fine wines? We begin our curious journey into Bordeaux in the 12th century, when France as we know it today didn't quite exist just yet, so Bordeaux was only part of the Aquitaine region. This is where we meet a young duchess named Eleanor, who will become pretty much the mother of all European royalty. So, back in the 1100s, there's a 14-year-old girl named Eleanor. Her father is the Duke of Aquitaine. Sadly, her brother dies, then her father dies. So she is married off, yes, at the age of 14 or 15, to the heir of the French crown, Louis VII.
Yes!
Here in beautiful Bordeaux Cathedral. And Eleanor becomes the queen consort of the Franks.
Eleanor from Aquitaine, when she was only 15, she got married to this prince. He was 17. A week later, they became king and queen of France because the father of Louis the Fat, had died, and maybe of cholesterol, who knows?
Who knows? Eleanor of Aquitaine was considered one of the most beautiful women of her time. She was very headstrong and rebellious. In fact, there were rumors of infidelity with her own uncle. Yikes! The king and queen had 2 daughters together, which you'd think would be a marvelous thing, but being the Middle Ages, not being able to produce a male heir was so obviously Eleanor's fault. So for this and many other reasons, let's just say that marriage didn't work out too well. So after 15 miserable years, they get an annulment. And here's where the fun part starts.
When she was 32, she got married to this 17-year-old Henry Plantagenet.
17.
Yeah.
17.
But she was a queen before. She was the queen of the French before. She got queen when she was 15. She got married here in Bordeaux. And this beautiful Eleanor divorced, got married to this beautiful young man, and became the Queen of England.
How many people do you know that get to be queens of one kingdom in their lifetime, let alone two? But the saga continues. To expand the kingdom, one must create heirs, lots and lots of heirs, like 8.
Whoopee!
Yes, Eleanor and Henry had 8 children together. That is a lot of royal diapers.
And you know, 2 are very well known. We all know Robin Hood.
Right?
One is Richard Lionheart, and the other one, John Lachlan. And she married all her kids so well. So the Kingdom of England, Kingdom of France, Kingdom of Spain, of Germany, of Denmark, and so on, half Europe.
Now, what does Eleanor's saga have to do with Bordeaux? A whole lot. She is the reason why Bordeaux becomes English. That's right, English, not French, for about 300 years, from the mid-12th into the mid-15th centuries.
Hello.
Under the English, citizens of Bordeaux were given unusual freedoms, including being able to elect their own mayors.
Yes, quite.
This union also brought about great prosperity in Bordeaux's golden age, partly thanks to some great Bordeaux wine, which we'll get to in a minute. But first, more English-French curiosities to explore on this bizarre coat of arms on a gross clock.
This is the grosse cloche, not because it's gross, but because grosse means big and cloche means bell. Below that, we see this really neat coat of arms. It has symbols for both England and for France because, of course, both countries ruled over Bordeaux during different time periods. And below that, here is the best part. The archway you see here, that's only one of 2 left in the entire city that were original gates with the medieval wall that used to circle the town.
And these medieval remnants, although beautiful today, stand as reminders of an unfortunate time period for Bordeaux, the plague, when infested rats were invading through these gates instead of happy tourists.
Now that is really gross.
Yikes!
Germophobia aside, this bell tower and gate is all that's left of Bordeaux's medieval Hôtel de Ville, or City Hall, which you can see a cute little picture of under the bell on the coat of arms. But who's that little kitty? And these floating flowers and floating moon?
Huh?
Well, from the top, we have the fleur-de-lis, symbol of the French royal family. And the kitty, well, he is the English leopard, a symbol of the English royal family.
Ooh.
The castle, well, that is this City Hall. Well, what it looked like before everything but the center was torn down. But down at the bottom is the most curious part. See that little crescent moon at the bottom? Why is it floating in the river? Because it is the river. One of Bordeaux's nicknames is Port de la Lune because of the crescent moon shape of the Garonne River, the river that gave the city such prosperity. And here's where it gets even better. In later years, that crescent moon was lifted off the medieval coat of arms and becomes its own city logo. See the 3 crescent moons intertwined here, on the fountain, and all over Bordeaux. But why 3? Some say it is because of the 3 ancient rivers of Bordeaux, which we'll get to later. Let's continue our curious exploration and decode more Bordeaux symbols. This English-French feud time period is also the reason why the square in the center of town is so, well, empty. So, in 1453, under the rule of King Charles VII, the 100 Years' War comes to an end, and Bordeaux is surrendered to the French.
Mine.
We were English for 300 years, and they had so many privileges from the English kings. And when the French came and finally took over, they lost a lot of their privileges, so they didn't like it. And the trade went down and everything, so they didn't like so much the kings.
Thousands of Bordelais who considered themselves English hightailed it to England.
Hello.
Those who stayed in Bordeaux were rewarded by something called Chateau Trompette.
Something very important was torn down in order to have this public space. What was here before?
Oh, you are right, because here before we had a fortress. It was even more fortified during Louis XIV, you know, the Sun King, and Vauban. And the purpose of this one was not to protect people of Bordeaux against invaders from the river, but to protect the king against the inhabitants of Bordeaux.
Yeah, that definitely didn't fly with the Bordelais.
No.
Chateau Trompette was later torn down and this space left wide open for all to enjoy.
Woohoo!
The park is called Place des Cancans, one of the largest public squares in Europe. But why is it called cancans, as in the number 5? Well, because the trees were laid out in a 5-point pattern.
Ooh.
But that's just the beginning of the curiosities here, like this column with a Statue of Liberty at the top, a rooster at the bottom, a giggling lady holding a duck, and do those horses have webbed feet?
Huh?
Well, it has something to do with why these guys are here too. Montaigne and Montesquieu, the legendary French philosophers, whose ideas helped to bring about the French Revolution. And the French Revolution is the reason for this statue.
It's called the Girondine. We had some people here during the French Revolution, very mild politicians, and they were not that mean, and they wanted to have a more softer revolution. They were purchased and they all lost their lives, as you can imagine. So we put the statue here to honor those 8 people.
So it is fitting that at the top of the Monument aux Girondins, we have a winged Lady Liberty breaking free from the oppression with a broken chain in one hand and a symbol of victory, the laurel branch, in the other.
Oh.
But she's not the only gal in town. At the base, there are 3 more ladies sitting in a pyramid shape. The lovely lady at the top of the triangle symbolizes Bordeaux with her cornucopia to symbolize abundance. She looks quite regal in her little post, but who are these other 2 ladies at the bottom? One with a swan and the other with a duck?
Quack.
The 2 other ones giggling and
Yes.
like us and talking to each other and smiling to each other. One is the Garonne River, which is here, and she has a beautiful, proud swan in her arms.
And the last
And
one?
the last one, she's just got a little duck, and which is symbolizing Libourne and the Dordogne River.
So what does Libourne think of that? Now there's anything wrong with ducks, but you have a swan, then you have a duck.
Yeah, because this is all the problem they had, because Libourne, they produce very good wines, you know, the Saint-Emilion wines, great wines, but they couldn't develop. Their river was not deep enough for the big ocean cruises to come, ocean ships,
okay.
and load the barrel.
It keeps coming back to that wine, doesn't it? Now, in order to move those huge barrels of wine, you're gonna need some horsepower, right? Well, how about some web-footed horsepower? That brings us to the Triumph of Concord.
What?
All kinds of fun symbols to talk about here at the fountain. At the very top, of course, we have the symbol of France, Concorde, holding up the olive branch. Over on this side, you may notice the horses here are a little bit different. Instead of hooves, they have either claws or fins.
Huh?
Those 4 horses pulling Concorde's chariot form a quadriga, an ancient Roman symbol of the chariot of the gods, just like the ones you see in Venice. But why the webbed feet on the horses here in Bordeaux? One theory says they're ancient mythological symbols of peace and happiness. Another theory says they simply symbolize the power of Bordeaux's rivers, and webbed feet are better than hooves for swimming. And finally, what about that rooster? That's the Gallic rooster, or French cockerel, the symbol of France since the Middle Ages. From roosters, swimming horses, and 3 naked ladies, we now go to another curious square with scary faces, a missing statue of a king, and of course 3 more naked ladies. This is Place de la Bourse, a beautiful example of identical buildings that form a unified wall, almost a curtain, you might say.
But this wasn't always here, and it's actually here for a very important historic reason.
Yeah, Bordeaux was a town of the Middle Ages, like all the towns in France, surrounded by a big wall. And the idea was to show Bordeaux to people, to make a commerce, better commerce. So here they destroyed the walls, 8 meters high, I don't know, 4 meters thick. They destroyed the walls to build this, which is absolutely gorgeous.
But if it was built for Louis XV, where is his statue? It's right here in the center of the square. Don't you see it?
No.
Oh yeah, that's right. A little thing called the French Revolution took care of that. Louis' statue used to be here, but the people tore it down. Later it was replaced by a fountain, and then the 3 graces were added. But why is it called Place de la Bourse? Well, Bourse simply means stock exchange, and what better building to show off your city's prosperity than having a thriving stock exchange right at your city's front door? Next, why is this royal square in the shape of a crescent moon? Well, as we've learned, the crescent moon is a nod to the Port de la Lune, Bordeaux's moon-shaped port. But there's another legend as to why Place de la Bourse is shaped like this. Some say the architects built just enough new buildings to make a good impression on visiting guests, and it also served as a curtain to hide the crumbling medieval city behind it.
Yikes!
It's kind of like throwing all your junk in the closet when guests arrive unannounced. But today, everything is sparkling clean, of course, including the Miroir d'Eau, built in 2006, touted as the largest reflecting pool in the world. But I wouldn't recommend diving into this pool. It's only an inch deep. And to adorn this regal square, what better than a bunch of scary faces everywhere? Ever feel like you're being watched?
Yikes!
All around Place de la Bourse, you will see these wonderful little faces built right into the architecture. Those are called mascarons. It's an Italian word for mask, and the idea is it could be anybody from the owners to a couple of little symbolic ones like this guy. That's Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, which is just perfect for Bordeaux.
Wine, you say? Yeah, wine is kind of important to the history of Bordeaux. So let's continue our journey through Bordeaux to find out how wine shaped Bordeaux's history. But first, how about a little music to go with our wine? So, just as Place de la Bourse was a symbol of Bordeaux's prosperity in the mid-1700s, so was the Grand Theatre, completed in 1780, built to be a temple of the arts and light.
The opera was imagined by Richelieu, the little nephew of Richelieu, not the one with the musketeers.
Right.
So the other one, his little nephew. And he was the intendant of Bordeaux in 1778. And he wanted to leave something behind him, so something great, and he needed a theater. So his idea, as you know, that it was a Roman town, and there was a kind of a big Roman building. They destroyed this, and they built the opera.
The Grand Theatre was designed to be quite grand indeed, with 12 Corinthian columns and ancient Greek goddesses and muses representing the different arts. But it's not all Greek to me. Built by Freemasons, legend says there's hidden Freemason symbols everywhere in the theater. Shh. And inside is where we find the Grand Staircase, which later inspired the one at the Paris Opera House, which later inspired the one at New York's Grand Central Terminal. But I digress. Back outside is the Place de la Comédie, which is where we find our next curiosity. Because if you're headed to the opera, you need to dress for it. Fortunately, one of the longest pedestrian shopping streets in Europe is right next to the Opera House, Rue St. Catherine.
St. Catherine Street is one of the busiest shopping streets in all of Europe today, but back in ancient Roman times, it was one of the original roads. In fact, most of Bordeaux still runs along that ancient Roman street plan. So when you're shopping here, you're walking through history. But did you know that you're also walking on water?
Ooh.
That's right, there are ancient underground rivers here. Now, that was great for the thirsty Celts and Romans of Bordighalla, but it wasn't so swell for 18th century Bordeaux architects.
They had big difficulties when they built the opera. Suddenly they found water because we are so close to the river. Big problem. Half of the opera is built on pillars, on wooden pillars. It's a floating opera, as a matter of fact.
That's amazing because most of the town is actually still on pillars.
Because why did the Celts or the Romans settle down here? Because we had not only one river, we had 3 rivers, which are now underground rivers. But in old days, already in the antique time, the harbor was in the center of town. And this is why we have water absolutely everywhere.
People think of Venice as a floating city because it's small islands. And you see that. I don't think people realize that Bordeaux was originally built on these posts.
It's the same. Maybe not
Feels
as
pretty
much.
sturdy. Doesn't feel like we're floating. I think we're okay.
Now we go from Place de la Comédie with pretty Parisian buildings, we swing by Place de la Bourse with more pretty Parisian buildings, and then back to Place Pay-Berlon with even more pretty Parisian buildings. I'm starting to detect a theme around here.
Look at this beautiful street here in Paris. Well, the only problem is we're not in Paris, we're in Bordeaux. Now, Parisians may not like this part of the story, but their beloved Baron Haussmann lived and worked here in Bordeaux amongst buildings like these before he was asked by Napoleon III to modernize Paris. And in Paris, of course, is where he created those grand boulevards and a whole lot of buildings that looked a little bit like this. So the question is, did he copy Bordeaux to create the Paris that we know? Well, this is an argument I want no part of.
Yup, many of these beautiful, homogeneous buildings are from Bordeaux's second golden age in the 18th century, when about 5,000 of these buildings were put up here in beautiful Bordeaux. And I'll give you 3 guesses as to why Bordeaux had such prosperity back then. Okay, maybe 1. Yep, where else but Bordeaux would you have an entire museum dedicated to the history of wine?
The history of wine has always been intertwined with the history of man and the history of religion, from offering wine to the gods during pagan times to incorporating wine into Christian rituals and traditions. Then, of course, there's the art. Back to ancient Roman, ancient Greek, through the Renaissance, and even in modern art today, there is always art dedicated to sacred wine.
And that sacred Bordeaux wine history starts with its divine climate and geography, with those 3 ancient rivers that made conditions perfect here for those ancient Romans of Bordighalla. They were the ones who planted the very first vineyards here. Good thinking, guys. Then, in the Middle Ages, the marriage of our old buddy Eleanor and King Henry ensured that the wine trade with England and then around the world would prosper. And then we get to another crucial stage in Bordeaux's wine history, but it's not French.
So why is Bordeaux so known for its wines? Well, it all has something to do with this neighborhood called the Chartrons, named after the Chartreux, which was a monastery back in the 1400s. Now, around that time, nobody wanted to live here other than the monks because the entire area was a swamp.
That was until about the 17th century,
When the Dutch arrived and said, hey, we know how to drain the swamp, and started Bordeaux's first wine business by selling and exporting the local wines grown here. And basically today, when you're drinking that fine French wine, you have the Dutch and a swamp to thank for it.
And finally, in the mid-1800s, the Bordeaux Chateau were classified, and that same wine classification is still used today. So, from ancient Bordighalla along the waters of 3 ancient rivers, which today allow you to walk on water on a very long pedestrian street, next to a grand theater dedicated to ancient Romans and Greeks, to a place dedicated to a French king who got knocked down during the French Revolution and got replaced by even more ancient muses, surrounded by a wall of glorious architecture, greeting guests arriving at La Porte de la Lune, which gives us the city symbol here on a gross clock and back here on the fountain, to a giant but bare square dedicated to more French revolutionaries, named after the number 5, with 4 horses, 3 giggling ladies, 2 fat birds, and 1 soaring Lady Liberty. But we can't forget the soaring cathedral on another place, where the first wedding of a fiery local gal took place, and while that marriage didn't stick, her second one sure did, and led to a crucial union with England and a golden age of prosperity for Bordeaux, which of course brings us right back to its sweet, sweet wines made possible by those rivers. Bordeaux has so much to be curious about.
Thank you for joining us on our educational journey, and hopefully now you're even more curious about the who, what, where, why, and how of Bordeaux. As they say here in Bordeaux, la vie est douce dans le Bordelais. Curious Traveler is made possible by the following.
Europe is a treasure trove of fascinating history, rich culture, and renowned cities. Ama Waterways River Cruises offers a way to see all this wonder in person. You can discover more at amawaterways.com.
Towering fjords, Nordic culture, Scandinavian heritage, the Northern Lights. So many ways to experience Scandinavia. Adventures begin at firebirdtours.com. Blue ribbon bags, baggage protection made simple. We track and return your delayed baggage around the world. We send automatic email updates so you can do what you love. BlueRibbonBags.com. Anatomy, European travel clothing for women. Anatomy is designed to fly. Anatomy.com.
Still curious? Go to CuriousTravelerTV.com and follow us on Facebook at Curious Traveler TV, on Twitter at Curious Trav TV, and on Instagram at Curious Traveler TV.